Now, Tom, I understand as well, there may be someone breaking into our conversation as well. You're on your way
Yes,
to be with Vashi at the Queenie. Is that the idea?
exactly. So
Okay.
yes, I always go after my French TV show. I always talk with you guys, and then I go over to the CTV studios and I do Power Play with Ashley Capellas. But she said, "Well, come over and join us at the Queenie, and we'll do it from there." So I'm on my way,
Oh,
and they swore to me that I would have a taxi, but of course it's not here yet. So you might hear me tell the taxi driver
no.
where we're going. But I'm glad to
Okay.
be with you guys since you've been chatting to each other about
There
all
you
sorts
go.
of other stuff too. So
Yeah.
Never
Okay.
you mind now,
You
Tom.
feel free
Never
to yell
you.
anything at any time, Tom. Tom, let me start by asking you. This is the story, I guess, so far the big story this afternoon. The federal court ruling that the Liberal
huge,
government's
huge.
invocation of
Yeah.
the Emergencies Act was, quote, unreasonable and unconstitutional. What's your take on that?
Huge decision. I'm very surprised by it, to be honest with you. I thought that once you established that a group was refusing to leave until they had changed the government, it was a pretty good start in showing that you needed the Emergencies Act, but there you go. It's a very thoughtful decision. I haven't had time to go through it with a fine-tooth comb yet, but I've read large parts of it. It's well-reasoned, but now we've got two well-reasoned decisions saying the exact opposite, so that's why you had the unusual situation of senior ministers saying today, this thing is going straight to appeal. Usually they say, oh, well, we'll look at it with the lawyers and blah, blah, blah. They were clearly caught off guard by this thing. Chrystia Freeland was left catching, the flack on this one and giving the answers. I don't know where Trudeau was, but it's quite obvious the government was really not expecting this decision, nor was I. It's a huge decision, and it's a massive decision that Pierre Poilievre has already started taking advantage of, because all he has to do is go through it and say, okay, so you removed people's rights. You weren't allowed to. His whole spiel about freedom. Guess what? He gets to he gets to crow about this decision because it goes right in the direction that he's been talking about.
Tom, when you look at that situation, what could have been done differently? Could anything have circumvented that situation
Well,
from
there
going
are
on as long as it
outside
did?
factors that had nothing to do with the convoy or anything else, like the extraordinary. I'm trying to say it charitably. The extraordinary difficulty that the person who had been chosen to be the chief of police of Ottawa encountered. He simply wasn't up to the task. Let's just put it that way. He had to resign right at the middle of this thing. We often don't mention it, but the CJAD Quebec was brought in to solve this thing. There were, there's a very large representation of the riot police of the CJAD Quebec. This thing was not going to go away. They found thousands of rounds of ammunition at the border in Coutts, Alberta. They knew that there were threats, and I'll give you an example. At one point in his decision, he says, well, you have to prove that there was a threat to life or property. He says, yes, you've proven that it could have been a serious problem for the economy of the whole country, but that's not property. Well, I thought it was, sort of like our collective property, the property of all of us. But apparently the judge didn't exactly see it that way. So that's the type of thing that we've been dealing with.
So let me ask then, as far as ramifications are concerned, so you're right, Chrystia Freeland announced right away the government will appeal. How does this play out when we get to the end of all this?
Well, I think that we're going to have to get a direct reference to the Supreme Court. Hold on, I'm going to tell them where we're going.
Sure.
On s'en va à la porte en avant du Reine Elisabeth, s'il vous plaît, de l'hôtel. Wait. So I think that the fastest thing for Trudeau to do is simply to do what we call a reference case. I mean, he's going to have to, this part has to be looked at with his lawyers. But I think that that's the safest route. Get this thing clarified right away because, okay, we're talking about the immediate political fallout here. Trudeau's got egg on his face. Poilievre is crowing that he was right. But think about the next time something happens in Canada, whichever government it's going to be. You have to clarify these doggone rules. And obviously, if you've got two completely diametrically opposite decisions, well, nobody knows what they're supposed to stand on.
Okay. Were you surprised at the immediate decision that the government would appeal, or is that just a given?
I think that they did it intentionally to show how shocked they were by this decision. But this judge, mostly he's just he's weeks away from his compulsory 75-year-old retirement. He's a very respected judge. If you look at his past decisions, he tends to really strongly favor human rights. This is a strong, articulate, well put together decision. But as was Justice Rouleau's, it really hung together. Now, what was interesting, it's almost like going heads or tails and the quarter landing right on its edge. Rouleau basically said, you guys have beaten me up. I've been tortured and dragged into this thing, and I'll say, okay, maybe you were justified, but just barely. And Mosley is saying, at one point, he has this very funny sentence at the end. He goes, If I was one of the people making this decision, I would have probably agreed that you needed to invoke the Emergencies Act. And then he says, but you shouldn't have.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
it's a very bizarre
Okay.
sentence. Yeah.
So let's move on. Yeah.
Let's talk about, you're on your way to see Vassy. I heard you, I think it was yesterday, speaking to Vassy about Pierre Poilievre needing a thesaurus because incompetent seems the only word he can use to describe people these days. You wrote about it in the Gazette today. I mean, this is nothing new for him. Does it tell us something more about him that we didn't know already?
Well, those of us who have known him for years and years, as I have, know this about him. He likes insulting people, and he amuses himself by insulting people in front of his conservative colleagues to make them laugh. And so humor is great in politics, but it's, in the case of Mr. Poilievre, I've noticed it tends to be at the expense of other people. And people are going to start to learn that about Pierre Poilievre. He's got a quick mind. He's got he's very convinced. He's got a high opinion of his own opinions. But I think that it's going to start to wear, because fundamentally, as a Canadian value, maybe a universal value, but Canadian value is like showing a modicum of respect for other people, and it's one thing to say, okay, I really think that the government blew it in this file. They were incompetent in getting passports out. They were incompetent in their answer on Israel-Gaza. You can say that an action was, but here he goes after Valérie Plante. He goes after Bruno Marchand. He personalizes it, and there's something lost in the field of politics when everything becomes a personal insult the way this has happened.
But as you say this, I can't help but thinking some people listen to that and go, well, you know what, that's how politics used to be, but you better get used to this because this is how they're going to be.
Well, I think you're completely right. And I think we put that together with the fact that Poilievre is such a wizard with social media, because he is definitely, he's the youngest, but he's also the most gifted. I mean, everybody talked about Jagmeet Singh when he came in, and he was quite good. But this guy, Poilievre, is a notch above everybody else. Trudeau's got tons of people doing this for him, but he's never had the creativity or the ability to really dig in the way Poilievre does. But what do we know about social media? It's a cesspool. It's places where, people just say the worst things about each other and about everything that's going on. And I think that his wizardry in handling social media should be put to good advantage, as it might be, but he tends to have retained the principal lesson for me that he's retained from the world of social media is how to insult people. And again, I think that's going to start to wear thin on the average Canadian.
Okay. Last thing I want to bring up, because this seems to be now a developing story. I thought this might have ended a day or two ago. The Northvolt dilemma, if you want to call it that, for the Quebec government, and the feds have already weighed in on this. And now you're having people who live out there. There's protests starting. They have to stop cutting trees. Northvolt. Yeah. I'm wondering how long it's going to take Northvolt to say, you know what, we don't want to have to put up with this anymore.
Well, I think that that's probably the objective. But you've got there are two different things at play here. One is the sabotage of the trees. That's something called spiking. That was, as far as I know, from my memory, was invented in Clayoquot Sound in British Columbia to try to save one of the rainforests. But it actually means a severe danger for any forestry worker that would cut any of those trees, and it would render those trees useless. You can't bring them to a sawmill if they've got metal spikes in them. So they can't even be used if and when they are cut down. So that is an incredibly serious mistake, whoever did that. And we don't know who did it. So let's just say that. But whoever did it was not thinking. The other thing is a very serious group called the Centre Québécois de droit en environnement. So the Quebec environmental law group, the most important one, the center, they've got a tremendous batting average. When they do take the odd case, they usually win. They're that good. So you've basically got a team of some of the best environmental lawyers in Quebec. And they've looked at this thing as I have, and they're saying, look, this is regulatory capture. This is where the company that's supposed to be regulated in the public interest has basically turned the tables and said, oh, by the way, change the rules so that there are no hearings by the Quebec Environmental Hearing Board, what we call the BAP, the Bureau d'Audience Publique en environnement. We don't want hearings. So change the ceiling. Make it 60,000 instead of 50,000 tons, because 50,000 is the cutoff point, and that way we won't have hearings. Well, I'm sorry. Those hearings exist to find out what the problems are, what the advantages are, what a fair, balanced approach to the project is, and give people information so we can know if it's socially and environmentally acceptable. And Chair Fitzgibbon was on the air with us last night. I was in studio with him, with Mr. Fitzgibbon in Montreal on the French side. And he came up with this. It was quite galling. He said, well, if the public decides that they won't want it, well, then we might not have this project. Almost as if it was being used as a threat. hey, listen, Mr. Mr. Minister, if you had been serious about, living in a society based on the rule of law, where the law applies to everybody and people don't get to change the laws to their own advantage, we might have already had the end of the public hearing process. We would have had a fair evaluation of what it represents, and then people could come to a proper decision. But instead, they tried to cut the corners, and they tried to give them a break, and they don't want to look at it. And that's why people are suspicious, and that's why this environmental law group is pushing very hard to get this thing analyzed properly.
And we will leave it at that.
Say
Tom,
hi to,
enjoy your cab ride. Say hi to Vashi for us.
We met her yesterday. She's delightful.
Love downtown Montreal. Take good care, guys.
Take care.
You too.
Tom Mulcair.